Well, Ed, it's an incredible pleasure to be able to have this time with you one-on-one. And thank you so much for being in the exhibition.
Thank you, Cheryl. It's a truly a pleasure and an honor to be working with you, engaging with you. I know it goes back some time, and it's great to see how we are continually involved in the art world. So I'm just celebrating.
It's still there. Hang it in.
That's right.
Um, I, yeah, I have a lot of questions, even though I know your work very well, and I've seen how it has expanded and how you've been pushing a lot of your questions. You know, your work spans drawing and paper cuts, photography, video installation. I would even say performance. And
I can say
and
that.
that yeah, and that you use such a wide variety of materials. And very broadly, I mean, you know, the work issues through a hybridity or like a strategy of hybridity around sort of Asian and Western histories and mythologies, and the way that you bring these into connection with very contemporary issues, situations and conditions, you know, is something that I've actually really marveled at over the years. I mean,
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say.
well, because there is this, you know, really deep research investigation into early on, you know, into like Taiwanese mythology. But then now we see, and you've brought us more in contact with some of the themes. I mean, the themes are many, like there's memory and trauma, loss, the spectral, the grotesque, and fear and vulnerability, but then hope, always hope. But then in communication with specific social concerns, such as forced migration, indigenous water rights and climate change. So these are adding a lot of layers to your work, which brings about an even more deeply engaged experience as you go from kind of a kind of personal, almost psychic exploration to a connection with what's going on in the world around us, and in a critical way, but that also is disarming. I don't know how else to describe it. It's kind of it's curious.
Mm-hmm.
But I would like to start with when we met in 1997, when you had the solo exhibition Ghosts at Obero in Montreal. And it was the first show I ever worked on, and I was really excited to work with you. So maybe we could go back to that particular body of work that, from what I remember, issued from that time that you spent in Taiwan, sort of researching, and then kind of just sort of make that a starting point, perhaps, for what's been going on over the last 20 years.
I can do that. So because I make a lot of drawings, and in a way they reflect maybe my concerns, or consciously or unconsciously they come out. So I see them as evidence of what I'm really interested in. And I realize there's an overwhelming sense in the bodies that I'm drawing, and I'm more drawn to the body just because they seem to be more expressive of us, and they give a sense of the narrative. So the more I put out, the more I realize my work is really kind of responding to the sense of fears and vulnerabilities that are in all of us. And I feel some of the events that are happening in the world, or many of the events that are happening in the world, is due to fear. People show their might because they're afraid. So, and they feel vulnerable, but they don't want to show that or say that, but that's what they are feeling, and that's how they're responding by using maybe violence to kind of mask the true sense of vulnerabilities and fears. So I decided to go back to Taiwan. I was born in Taiwan, so I came to Canada when I was 11, and as an adult in 1996, I was already like 38. I thought, well, I should go back and really think about where my own fears and vulnerabilities came from, because in a way we are products of our society. And by the age of 11, you know, I've gotten a lot of my baggage from Taiwan as well. So I went back specifically to look at ghosts and demons and things that are kind of haunting, because I still have this overriding sense of fear if I'm by myself as an adult in a darkened space, or at night if I'm all by myself, I would actually turn on a light, because I just have this conditioned I don't know, a bodily or psychological experience where everything's kind of fused together. And so I went back to research, and I also went back to look at all the kind of religious ceremonies that were available at the time in different cities, different towns, because in a way the religions, the ceremonies were tied together with what I was looking for. A lot of times ghosts and demons and gods, they all come through in these events. Taiwan is complicated in the sense that it's a small island, and it's the size of, I believe, Vancouver Island, so it's not very big, but it has a population that's similar to Canada. And there are actually other similarities in that before the Chinese came from the southern part of China to Taiwan, it was occupied by thousands of years by indigenous people. And there were maybe between 21 and 28, I'm not sure the exact numbers. I was told there were 21 tribes, but then I read somewhere that there were 28 different languages. They're more related to kind of Polynesian-based people. They had, traditional wear that had beads and feathers and beautiful costumes and colors, and the language was very different. There were some tribes that lived in on the coastal plains, and some lived in the mountains. And prior to leaving, and this is where the similarity is as well, is that the indigenous people were also looked down upon. And it was literally, we don't need you, as the government say, and we just want everyone to kind of convert to becoming a Chinese. But it's complicated as well in the sense that the Republic of China people, they actually came from China in 1949, trying to regroup to go back and fight the communists. So when they came, they also oppressed the local Taiwanese. They were saying, your Taiwanese dialect is not worthy of being used. So my mother actually didn't speak that language to me. My father was from China, so it was complicated again. So it has gone through, different kinds of oppression, not just for the Chinese, but for most importantly for the indigenous people. And it went through colonization as well. The Portuguese came through, the Dutch came through, and the Spanish was there also for a while. And after all that, the Japanese came through, and then the national, the people of Republic of China, the Chiang Kai-shek group of people came through. So that's where it is at now. Complicated.
So, I mean, all of these different forces would have such a massive influence on mythologies, stories, fears, and like how to transform those into kind of like disciplining or fear-mongering.
Yes.
Right?
You got it. You hit it right on the nail. So discipline and fear-mongering. I really felt as a child, even though I didn't know anything about politics, I just felt Taiwan was a really repressive place that I wanted to leave. So when my father finally left to go study in Canada, and 6 years later we followed, when I was on the plane, I was 11, I was so happy. I was jumping up, I was like kicking my feet. I didn't know where I was going, but certainly I thought it would be a better place. So I would say that parallels my journey in the arts, in the sense that I strive to go towards the unknown and be as excited as possible, because there is that sense of uncertainty. It is a journey at the end. So I'm up for the challenge.
I'm curious to know if you always drew. The drawing
Yes.
was always present in your life.
Yes, it started when actually I was in kindergarten, because in Taiwan we weren't poor, but we weren't, of means. My mother never had spare paper or pencil in the house for us to draw on. So the minute I went into kindergarten and we were given color pencils and paper with images already in the form of outlines to color, the minute I put colors down, I knew that was it. That was my calling. I loved it. So I just kept drawing from then on.
In relation to sort of drawing and like finding something really central to your understanding of who you are, and what you want to do. I just would love to hear about some of the different materials that you would start to use. Pen and paper and pencil, just to make marks at an earlier age, like in kindergarten, for example. Did that vocabulary get expanded?
I sadly no, because the education system was very, very, I would say, formulaic. As Chinese, and I think that's part of the reason, the language is so complicated. We were asked to always just memorize. We were never asked to think. So when I drew, it was based on representation. Everything was based on the real. Even when I was asked to enter a contest, an art contest, the teacher showed me what I should draw. So I kind of copied her. But in all that kind of prescribed ways of doing or thinking, there are moments that gave me ways of thinking outside the box. For instance, the person that won, I don't know if that person was a girl, guy, or whatever, or they, but I was really quite thrilled at the way it was explained. So apparently this person, this young child, presented a drawing that was completely blackened. But you kind of can see underneath there were something. So out of curiosity, the jurors asked this kid, why did you do this? And the child answered, well, it's a family having dinner, but halfway through the meal, the lights went out. And I just thought, wow, that is so amazing that art can actually deal with the sense of time and change. And I think that always stayed with me to really think outside the box as much as I can.
Wow, that's mind-blowing. And then, I mean, of course, that the lights would go out and that you have like this fear of being like in the darkness, and
Yes.
it's got to have hit you on so many levels. And it brings me back to the show at Oboro, the ghost show, because there was just sort of so much, how do you say, darkness. And I mean, literally plunging us into a different state of lighting.
Right.
What I recall about that exhibition, I mean, first of all, there were hundreds of drawings that were on fine paper.
Yes.
With this sort of translucent paper. They were 2 layers, so there were 2 layers of drawings. We had them pinned to the wall, but in a very interesting formation. It was amorphous.
Right.
The green, the lighting was normal when you went into the space. There was also like a small door. Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember that very well.
Step through.
Yes.
And you encountered all of these drawings in sort of a regularly lit environment. And then when you got to the back of the space, you would necessarily set off a sensor, which would then change the lighting to this green, this eerie green light, right? And then as well, fans would start coming on, like the ceiling fans that were linked, right? And then it would sort of lift one a little bit, just sort of ever so slightly, one layer of drawing up to reveal the one behind.
Well, you got really good memory about the show.
Something I relive now and then, because I've been telling, I talk about it. I talk about that first experience, working with an artist and the depth and breadth of it. But then, do you remember we had another room behind? So you could go inside another room, which was a blacklit space.
Completely dark.
Yeah, like you really couldn't see anything until you came around in front of this other wall where you had done a large mural of, sort of the drowned ghosts. So playing on that, the myth of Those people who drowned and like are dragging other people down.
That's
And
right. So the story is these water ghosts, they are previously drowned victims, and their souls are not set free until they pull someone else down to replace them. So it feels like the myths and the stories and the fears and the hauntings are always being perpetuated in the same way that these ghosts have to, find someone to share the loss, and then they get set free. I like to go back to the drawings for a minute about the ghosts, in the sense that it was really hard for me to come up with something that I felt I didn't want to create a sense of a haunted house, but I still want to convey the sense of a ghostliness. So, and also the sense of representation was quite difficult because I didn't want to illustrate ghosts. And the dilemma is, in our world, when we see ghost movies or even alien movies, sometimes the images are so cliche because we can only kind of hook on to things that are familiar, even though there may not be any description visually or otherwise for ghosts or monsters. But so I started drawing what I thought were really cliched images of ghosts. So when I finished with these, I wasn't satisfied. Then I really kind of dug into myself to think about what is a ghost to me. And I felt if it's in the real world, not the fiction or the horror story genre-based ghosts, it would be people who haunt me based on their tragic death. So Hiroshima, for instance, or illnesses, or people who, or photographs of images of these brutally killed victims from all the different concentration camps. So I use that as a second set of drawings based on real life events. Then I had the dilemma of having two sets of drawings that seemed to, one illustrated the fictitious and the other one kind of illustrated the real. And I thought, well, since I'm working on transparent paper or translucent paper, I would try putting them together. And I felt that's where the third ghost, or the ghost that we construct in our imagination or that kind of haunt us, exists. It's in between these two spaces, the real and the fiction. So I'm quite interested in how we actually take something from the real to fictionalize it, to make it more palatable or consumable, or vice versa. How do we take something that's fiction and make it into real? So here, there are just these two layers of paper, and at a certain point, the fan on the ceiling would take the top layer out, and at the same time, the green lights cancel the green drawings in a way. So the ghosts that were done in the green lines seem to vanish or became less perceptible, and the black drawings based on the real images came through.
right, that's right. The first layer of drawings were drawn with green ink.
That's
and
right.
The drawings underneath were in black ink.
Right, that's right.
Yes, yeah.
And so at every step, I tried to challenge myself as well, because I felt if I were to use black ink with brush the same way I did with the ghost, the images were just too concrete. So what I did was I used two layers of the same material, which is translucent, acid-free, just regular acid-free paper, and I would wet both layers. And I would draw based on what I see in a photographic reproduction from a book or a journal of people who were victimized and died from different kinds of events. So I would make that drawing, and the drawing would be drawn on the top layer, and because the two papers are wet, the ink would actually travel through the interstices of the two layers. So before the ink ran and became nothing, I took the top layer off, and I used a hairdryer to stop the bleeding of the second layer. So hence really watery, kind of ghostly, ephemeral lines came through. So I was actually quite, I would say I was quite pleased with the effect that I was able to generate with this method, thinking of ways to really represent, but not this, at the same time not to illustrate as much. So it was only years and years later, I found out there's a Chinese artist from the 17th century, I believe. His name is Luo Ping, and he actually made a series of ghost drawings, and he did a similar effect, not with two layers of ink, but he would use the side of a big brush with water, and he would outline a ghost, and then he would take another brush with black ink, and you would put it on that wet line, and the ink would just disperse out like it was a faded, ghostly edge. I will actually send you some images later on about this artist's work.
Yeah, I mean, that must have really affected you. You
Oh
must
my God.
have felt this kind of affinity, across time, right?
Yes, definitely. It was definitely an affinity and a celebration across time and, in a way, culture as well, because I was making this work here in Canada and he did in China hundreds of years ago, but we had similar ways of, or similar, I would say we had the dilemma of how to actually depict something that's not really depictable.
Yes.
Depictable. Yeah, that's what.
Yeah. What also was very successful, I think, in this way of conveying what a ghost can mean and be, is the accumulation, the sheer number, of drawings, because you really kind of managed to allow us to never settle on one style of ghost or one way of seeing ghost.
Right.
They have really, really long hair and then no limbs, or just like and endlessly sort of fascinating and horrifying, sort of terrifying rather.
Right.
Which brings me back to this kind of discussion we were having in the panel about trauma.
Right.
And suffering, because within the suffering that you depict in these ghosts is a lot of compassion and empathy as well, elicited by the viewer. I don't know if you had anything more you would want to say about that, but there is something about the way, and it's just really impossible to put, I can't put my finger on it or find the correct words, but you transmit such an empathy to the suffering of these ghosts, and other beings later on, other figures that you draw.
I'm thank you. I'm not sure if I did it well, but I did try to transmit that. And I feel maybe the empathy comes from the fact that at the end, the ghosts are still quite human. They are parts of the bodies or the face or whatever it is. There are things that are, that says they are like us in a certain aspects. So going back to maybe thinking about Said, for instance, I think he said something about we constructed the Orient, or the white constructed the Orient in order to kind of dominate them. So I feel maybe in a way, and to also conquer the unknowable. So maybe in a way we did the same with ghosts. So we constructed this another other, to have more control, or to understand the world better, and to alleviate maybe some of our fears, or to cast some of our own sense of guilt and violence into these bodies, so that they're much more grotesque, they're much more violent and whatever it is, evil than us. But at the same time, we have constructed them. So they are in our own likeness in a very contradictory way, but it's a construction that responds to who we are at the end. In terms of the ghosts, I did do a whole series that were quite large, and they were actually based on figures other people drew. They were survivors of the Hiroshima and the Nagasaki, so they drew pictures of these figures. When I saw these drawings, I really felt that they actually saw ghosts. So when I made drawings referencing these figures, I already at that time decided that I could not copy what they made. It was wrong to, in fact, appropriate something that was so terrifying. So I came out with my own ideas of a ghostiness. And yeah, so that's because last time when we were talking, I was talking about trauma and how you represent, or how it is so difficult to how easy it is to re-victimize someone if you just do a straightforward representation or showing of their image, for instance.
Yeah. And what that shows me, or what the logic, or I guess an internal logic to the evolution of your practice, seems to lead us to sort of the pressing social issues, you know, of our in our contemporary condition that you feel really compelled to explore and provide a kind of aesthetic approach that is engaging, and conveys a sense of urgency, but is also a kind of, it's an aesthetic experience as well. You know, I remarked how in your artist statement, you talk about issues that touch you deeply, such as the situation of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. You know, and this has become like a very clear to me as a driving force, you know, in your work as an artist. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about the links that indicate that you are indeed engaging in an engaged practice.
Oh, sure. I mean, that's a really valid question to ask me. And there's no one answer. It's built up through many, many experiences and events. So for instance, when I was younger, I was teaching at the Emily Institute of Art and Design at that time. That was what it's called. I had some Indigenous students, and one day they ran into the class and they were crying, saying, you know, downtown East Side, they were just randomly picking us up, girls like us, and they were punching them. And I just thought, wow, like, that's terrible. And I felt helpless, even though they're the ones who are vulnerable and helpless. I didn't know how to console them. And also the fact that there was 5 or 6 years ago, I can't remember now, time kind of goes by really fast. There was that soldier who was guarding the monument, the war monument, and he was shot. And simultaneously, almost at the same time, I would say, in Quebec, there were 2 army people who were being run down by someone. So the media, including the army as well, so the media, the army, they had this narrative that our soldiers are vulnerable. And I really felt we should use these moments to reflect and use that as an opportunity to think, if these are men, they're trained to fight, they carry weapons, and they feel vulnerable, how about our Indigenous women and girls who are always vulnerable? And so I felt I needed to say something. Also, as a gay man, at a certain point in my lifetime, there were many incidents of gay bashing. So I just felt, I'm a guy and I was put in a vulnerable position, but again, there are people who are even more vulnerable than I am, so I need to say something. I'm not a politician or I don't use placards, I don't go to demonstrations, but I feel I can do things in other ways. And so in my drawings, for instance, I always play with the sense of the other, because I wanted to point out that the people who inhabit my world, that's their world. And you come in as an outsider and you say, wow, why is it that you only have 3 eyes? They will turn back and say, well, you only have 2 eyes. So I wanted people to understand that the sense of whatever they think is normal or familiar, in a way, is all a construction. And we use that as a gauge, as a starting point to judge others. And I feel that's completely wrong. There's a very wonderful art historian from the 200 to 300 AD. His name is Guopu. He actually said, based on this amazing book called the Mountains and Seas Classics, he said inside the book, there are all these strange, beautiful, wonderful, hybridized beings. He said, a thing in itself is not strange. It is I who makes it strange. And I really take that forward, because I think we are constantly judging people based on who we are. And then because we think there's a difference, or we want to create a difference so that there's a boundary between us, and then that's when the issues come up, the sense of superiority or inferiority or whatever it is. And I feel we need to, first of all, maybe celebrate similarities, then we can really celebrate the differences. But because going back to the sense of fear, people are afraid of differences. So I would say maybe we can find ways to come and say, in many respects, we're very similar. So after people are put at ease, we can really, really celebrate the myriads of wonderful cultures and languages and foods and colors and costumes.
Yes.
It's
Yeah, going back a little bit, we never really talked about this, but there are those years in between. Sort of, you arrive in Canada, you're 11 years old, you're on the, you're going to become a teenager soon, and with all of the issues of like, confusion around identity and who you are, negotiating different cultures and language, and how did that what experiences did you have, and how might those have impacted upon your decision to become an artist, and sort of what kind of artist you wanted to be?
Right. Coming to Canada, and because the show is on diaspora, I felt the word actually included a sense of community, that you would go from one place, let's say in my case, Taiwanese, and you would come into Canada and find Taiwanese people to settle in. We were thrown into the middle of nowhere, literally. We didn't know anyone. So the way to survive was to really try to learn English right away, adapt to all the new customs. We celebrated Thanksgiving, Christmas, like everyone else. I remember the first time my mother tried to make a turkey, she boiled it, and it would create the stink in the house. Everything was about learning. And I would say within a 2-year time period, I felt I was losing my Chinese writing and reading abilities, and I was forgetting the vocabulary, and I haven't really mastered English. So there's a period of time I felt so lost. There was no connection anywhere. I wasn't engaged into the new world that I found myself in, and I was losing what I had from before. So I would say drawing became even more important. It was an ability that I could do, and instantly people were thrilled. So I thought, wow, that's great. I don't need to speak. I don't need to write. I can just draw, and people were connected to me through the way I was able to make drawing. So that was really important as a way to continually developing. And I also felt I was actually cheating in school, because I always felt my writing ability was terrible. So I would augment my essays with drawings, or in my geography class, tons of colors. I always had good marks because I drew half of my essay.
Hey, that's like, leveraging the, what you got, the skills you have.
That's right. But I have to go back. So sorry, because one time I talked about my work, and this woman said to me, the way you speak is just like your drawing. It's like there, then it come back again, maybe.
No, I think
one thing, so one thing that really shifted my mindset about, I would say, 10 years ago is I did a project in Sicily, and I was flying back from Sicily to Milan and then back to Canada. And it was the day before Christmas Eve, so the airport was crowded. Finally, the gates opened, and we were passing through the customs people, and they were looking at people's passport, and everyone was just filing through as quickly as they can. Johannes has gone through already, and I saw there were 2 agents checking people's passports. One stopped a Black woman, and one stopped a Black guy. So for some reason, I assumed they were a couple, and they were just stopped by different people. So as I passed the Black guy, I felt if I just shut down, put my head down and ignored him like everyone else, all my practice was like nothing. So I looked him in the eye, and I'm saying with my eyes to him that I know you're there. And the minute he looked at me, I just got really angry with the woman who was treating him really badly. He was asked to stand there like a kid, and he couldn't move. And I swore. The woman said, "Keep going," and I just lost it. I swore to her. I swore at her.
Sometimes it just has to, you're compelled.
Yeah.
We have to do something.
So she threw us both to the side, took our passports, and we waited for her boss to come. And when he came, the other guy who's stopping the Black woman lunged at me saying, "In our country, kill people like you. And I just went,
Holy moly. Okay.
and the boss came, and I just thought, okay, so I just did it. I'm gonna spend Christmas in jail in Milan with this guy that I don't know, but I felt really badly for. And so the guy, as he came, and when the guy was lunging at me, he just put his hand out. He said, "I'm dealing with this." I didn't understand Italian, but I knew exactly what he was saying.
Wow.
And he said, "So why did you do what you did?" And I said, "A few years ago, I was in Amsterdam working on a project. I was there for 4 months, so I kind of lost track of news. When I was coming on the plane, the barking or whatever, the disembarking from the plane, before we reached the terminal building proper, I heard 2 custom officers saying, 'Oh, there's one,' pointing to me."
Oh, good Lord.
So I just played the victim. I just, like I was cowering. I didn't know what was happening. And later on, I found out that year there were a lot of Chinese illegals coming through other countries to get into Canada. But I was really angry with myself, playing the victim or playing to their hands of who I was. After they saw my passport, everything was fine. But I just felt at that moment in Milan, this guy was going through what I had similarly gone through. Of course, it's not the same event, but I felt so badly for him. And like I said, if I did nothing, I felt like my art was all superficial. I had done nothing.
Right, right. This is a really important point that you're making about engaged art practices because, you know, in some ways, being able to show art, to have that opportunity is has privilege, and it can be quite a performance. It's a performative thing, to put yourself out there, to put your work out there, and then to be challenged by your own values in a real world situation. What do you do? I mean, it just takes a ridiculous amount of integrity, because we have endless examples of double discourses and I guess instances of kind of just not really walking the walk. So that takes a lot of courage to do, and it's deeply affecting. I think being a diaspora person, having experienced the uneven power dynamics of what phenomenologically, being physically in this body, in this world, it creates an incredible degree of empathy that, if you choose not to ignore it and you choose to act, it is, it takes a tremendous amount of courage.
Yes, I agree with you. And I'm still searching for that. I'm also thinking ways to act that's more responsible and meaningful, because I can do so much as a cultural worker, but I want to create something at the same time that's even more impactful. So I'm working on it, but it's complicated because the minute I address any issue that deals with something that's not of me, people question, right? So I actually talked to several people before I started making a body of work that deals with trauma by referencing the indigenous people, mainly the missing, murdered indigenous women and girls. And I can't remember Matthew's last name, but he teaches at U of T in critical studies, Matthew. Anyway, so he said, well, like it or not, we're all complicit. If you do nothing, you're complicit. If you do something, at least you're doing something. And I also had a talk with Wanda Waterscoot. She's in the Indigenous Studies department at U of T. And she said, I told her the dilemma. I said, I want to do something, but I really felt maybe I'm going to be treading on the wrong grounds. It's not my issue. Maybe that people see like, why are you interfering? And she said, we've been fighting this battle for so long. It's nice to get a fresh voice or a different voice that help us. So that gave me a lot of courage just from her saying that. So the work that I've been doing deals with that. And going, so all this, I like to bring it back to the sense of diaspora. So as a young kid coming to Canada, I didn't know the difference between Jewish people, indigenous people, anyone that was here. If they were not Black, I thought they were the same group of people, you know? But thinking back, as not right now, but earlier on thinking back, I remember this nice, really nice, gentle family of kids. They were completely isolated. Either it was a self-imposed, or that they were ostracized, or both. And I remember, I can still see their faces. And I now know that they were indigenous, and they just felt out of place even in their own homes, Canada or Turtle Island. And I just felt, well, the sense of this diaspora is about finding your home, a new home, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So for them to not feel at home in their own home is terrible.
Yes. I mean, this is therein lies, you know, the eternal conversation about homeland, about homing, and being rooted, and what that means, and fighting or struggling with this sense of being, of feeling rootless. And when I found diaspora has been a great home for me, because then we can have a way to root ourselves within something that is larger, and kind of feel, you know, connected, which is what you search for constantly.
Right. Well, my feelings are very conflicted in the sense that I thank Canada for giving our family this opportunity. But at the same time, I feel Canada has done wrong to the indigenous people.
Right.
So how is it that I can celebrate me calling Canada Canada when they actually took the name or the names away from the indigenous people? Canada was never Canada before they made it into Canada. So it feels like someone invited me to their house, say, oh, make yourself at home, stay as long as you want, do whatever you want, you can help contribute to society. Then I realized they don't even own the home, and the people who own the home are outside, and they can't even come in. So I just feel, you know, like if I was in a different country saying this, maybe I'll be charged treason. But I feel in Canada, there's still some kind of liberal.
We can still do that right now.
We can still contest our own government. I'm very disappointed with Trudeau. To tell you, I feel he could be the one that made the change, but I don't know.
I feel the same way. You know, where diaspora also can have some way of getting to the deeper complexities of what it is, what the consciousness is and the experience is that there is an incredible ambivalence. I think it names the ambivalence between what your affinity is and its relationship to national identity or the nation state. And over time, sort of as a good Canadian, when I was like maybe 18 or 19, I was very pro-Canada. I was sort of nationalist in a, you know, really weird way. And then as I come to understand the project of nation building, which has at its heart cultural genocide of Indigenous peoples, a multiculturalism policy, which is really just a smokescreen that actually articulates the differences between the immigrant other and the sort of Anglo-Saxon and you know, sort of French settler, you know, colonies as being kind of the baseline for what Canadian means. The less I identify or want to identify willingly with the nation state. I have a nationality which allows me to function, and a place that I live in, which is so-called Canada. But I don't have the more the get older I get, the less I have um, I don't know, any kind of sense, or I'm very critical of the sense of patriotism, sense of,
Right.
nationalism is like very problematic.
Right. I
Yeah.
feel like, yes, I feel I've been very privileged. I was given lots of opportunities. So how do I take all this privilege and opportunity and make it so that it benefits everyone? I remember the previous 1-5, the panel discussions you had, you discussed the idea of freedom. And I really feel we're not free, no one's free until everyone's free. And I just feel I can never feel truly at home until everyone's made at home. That I'm also invited by the indigenous people to say,
Mhm. Amen. Yeah, I'm with you there. Um, and I mean, I hear you talk about sort of you have researched and have knowledge of the treatment of indigenous peoples in Taiwan. You have direct experience with students, indigenous students, and what they've been going through in terms of instruments of violence that have allowed to happen and continue to happen to control and suppress this population. And and then of course from a creative standpoint, as an artist, you've developed ties with Inuit artists, for a really, really long time. So your research and concerns are really connected. I even think about how I've read a lot about the literary influences and that have informed your understanding of the importance of the balance of harmony and preservation of land and the relationship between nature and animals. It's something that I find comes up in your own kind of figurative cosmology, in whereas animals and humans are often fused into these hybridized, creatures that are kind of like awesome and sort of frightening, but then also like really, I don't know, like something we kind of know in a weird way
right,
that
well,
we shouldn't be afraid of.
right. So I still have lots of research and reading to do before I can feel comfortable to state what I state and make what I make. But to just follow up on what you said about these hybridized creatures, for me, it's like a wishful thinking in the sense that I did a drawing series called Two Worlds. So it was this land-based being that were fighting these water-based beings. And so they fight and fight and fight. And it was actually based on a residency I was doing in Amsterdam. When I go to a city, I usually go to the historical museum to see how the country's formed. And then I would say 99.99999% of the time is through some kind of conflict. One group kills the other group or conquers the other group, and then something happens. So in my wishful world, I thought about a water-based being and a land-based being contesting, and they perpetually fight. But at the end, over time, because they're always fighting, and they were interlocked as well, just by physical closeness, that they created these hybridized offsprings. And at the end, they couldn't fight anymore because they were themselves. So that's where that idea kind of comes from. It's a wishful thinking for a brighter future that at a certain point, you can't say that person isn't like you anymore because
Right.
everyone's kind of
Exactly.
everywhere.
It's like the ultimate argument for so-called intermarriage or miscegenation.
Right,
It's just like if
right,
we all do it, then we have a really difficult time discerning who who can and who cannot have access or have uh, just be like
right,
in a positive way.
right. So,
Um,
so during the COVID, what I'm reading, one of the things I'm doing that I'm very strict about this is to learn more about uh, indigenous rights issues and the state of how we are treating indigenous people in the world. So I started off with a book called Unsettling Canada. And I can give you the name. I have to look at the list. I'm really bad with names, but should I just find it and give it to you? Because I think it's really important.
Yeah, of course.
Sorry, I'm just like, where are my paper? Usually when I prepare notes to talk,
Yeah,
then I look at them, I just get confused and I just don't look at them anymore.
me too.
So the book that was quite instrumental for me to really think about our relationship as well, called Unsettling Canada, and it's co-written by Arthur Manuel and Grand Chief Ronald M. Derrickson.
Okay.
The one I'm also working on right now is it's by Tanya Talagak, right? And it's called All Our Relations. I initially heard all this in the, I don't know what it's called, but it was on CBC radio. They were talking about giving her speech, a presentation, a series of talks that she gave. Inspiring, because
Absolutely.
I feel the more information we have, the more we are empowered to be part of the change.
I mean, that book was a huge influence, and for me too. And when I was thinking about title for the show, and I think titles are really difficult.
Yes.
The first thought was the title of that book.
Okay.
And then, you know, I had a discussion with Ginny actually about the relationship between diaspora, people of color, and Indigenous people. And then we thought maybe at this moment, as this discussion is in its early stages, that I should not appropriate that title. I shouldn't appropriate the title anyway, but also like what would be very complex to explain the reference at this time. So then it just became relations.
Right. Well, in a way, I would assume, but don't quote me on this, all our relations isn't an idea, it's lived. So you don't even have to talk about it. It's already existing in the way you act, you treat each other, you treat nature, and how nature treats you back in the reciprocating way. So it's not stated out loud, you know, it's an act.
Right. It's a practice.
It's a practice, right?
Yeah. I mean, I want to say many more, ask you many more things, but maybe what we'll hone in on then at this point is, you know, your creative process, which involves both spontaneity and very careful, precise assembly of different aspects. So maybe you could talk to me a little bit about the layering in your work and the trace of the trace and the use of paper. I know it's probably too much to unpack, but yeah, I'm not sure how to get into it. I guess I would love to just hear you talk about, you know, your the spontaneous drawings. If you still kind of engage in that sort of methodology, and then the large drawings that you do, which can be assemblages of the smaller drawings put into contact with one another so that figures may become in dialogue with another, that perhaps a narrative, very loose and open to interpretation, might come into being.
Right. In terms of my practice or my process,
Yes.
It doesn't usually happen by me just sitting and thinking and say, oh, I'll try this. It usually evolves around something that happened through accidents or through some practical event that I have to kind of just address. So for instance, the layering or the monoprinting that happens in my work, it actually came about years and years ago. When I was doing my master's degree, I felt everything I was doing was for the advisors. It wasn't for me anymore. So I kind of decided that I would just stop everything and start making a series of self-portraits. And the portraits would not be me looking at myself, because I felt if I were to just draw what I look like, it was just something that people would see of me. I wanted to use that opportunity to present the inner or the whatever, the interiority of myself. So they were done without looking at myself. And I made a task of doing one a day. While doing that, I felt, and I needed something small so I can carry it. So I can be in, I don't know, Montreal, and I can draw on the train or whatever. but I also felt that over time, when I was amassing these portraits, so there were, I don't know, 3 years of one every day, kind of, that they needed to somehow be connected. And because I was using ink most of the time, because charcoal was too messy, ink, when it was still wet, it left this mark on the paper. And so I used that as an opportunity to actually capture an imprint, a mark from that, that day's drawing. And this imprint became the starting point for the next day's drawing. So in that way, I felt there was a connection, the trace from the previous day left to start a drawing for the next day. So they all had more or less some kind of palimpsest kind of mark on them. And I really like this way of working, because it didn't, it wasn't that I'm starting with a blank canvas. I always had to deal with the thing that was already there. And I like that, because as I mentioned, I started with illustrating or doing representational things. And for me to start with a blank thing, it's like I'm just performing, making something. I wanted to respond to something that's already there. So this ghostly print was perfect. But then when I started to research into torture, in real life torture, and how they were related to religious kind of treatments of saints, you know, like Saint Agatha or whoever, Saint John, whoever got tortured or limbs pulled off or skin flayed or eyes pulled out or breast lopped, I was interested in how they actually relate to real life torture. And so I thought drawing in this way was perfect, because it made really messy marks. So they became quite random, somewhat violent, and very viscous. It's like the way when a body's opened up, it just becomes, the inside and the outside are kind of everywhere. There's no rationale anymore, but it just made perfect sense. So I use that as a way to draw my hybridized kind of monstrous looking creatures. And the layers for me, as I mentioned in the last conference, that it really is about narratives. It's like there's so many layered narratives happening. To just reduce everything to just one simple scene feels, that's not how the world is. The world is much more complicated. When we talk, we are talking through all the experiences we had, through all the lenses that we know and understand, and it comes through. So to me, this one voice, in fact, comprises many layers of voices from different time periods, from the different lenses that we pick up along the way. So that's where the layering, the complication comes from, because also through the layering, the viewer have to selectively figure out which story they want to decipher and interpret. So that's also very much like the real world. There's so much noise, so much information in there. For us to make sense of it, to be able to kind of hold on to it, not feel overwhelmed, we start to simplify and reduce, and we select things that make sense for us, or makes us feel more comfortable, at ease, or whatever it is. So I keep doing these complicated drawings that I have to negotiate to figure out where is this thread taking me, and what happens when that narrative overrides this narrative, and how do I bring the other one back? So there's this constant, I would say, contestation of voices and power and control. So my work is about explorations and different creatures confronting each other. They come to this place where they think both sides are kind of weird, but they don't know that they're both kind of, you know, not what the standard kind of figures. So it's about curiosity, it's about fear, it's about wonder, it's about trying to engage and make meaning when things don't seem to make sense anymore.
Right. And the work in the show is a really excellent example of, you know, of what you're describing. It's such a huge, it's quite huge drawing, and you see how you have taken, you know, sort of separate drawings and put them together. So you have this, you see the kind of grid formation that becomes part of the materiality of the piece, because you effectively fuse them together, and you can see the fusion lines. And then you kind of like take a moment to look at one corner and sort of like, okay, what's going on there? And you can spend like so much time doing that. And I like that. And it's because it's never it's never finished. Like it's never fixed. you know, these narratives are really mutable.
Mhm.
And I think it's a really interesting connection, right, to your own sort of story. You know, all of these things kind of coming together. Some of them are serendipitous. Some of them are very much intentional.
Mhm.
And then and how you interpret some of these, you know, figures, especially in terms of power dynamics and uneven power dynamics. It's like there is a figure who literally has its own head up its own ass.
Why not?
I mean, then there are so then those are those moments that, you know, of satire even that I really delight in. By way of closing out the discussion, Ed, I just really want to thank you for sharing, you know, sharing with us, and for being um, so courageous with your work, and helping us to see ways, you know, to make meaning beyond the work that we make, but how we bring it into our lives. It's
Thank you.
extremely inspirational, and you know, thank you for that.
You're welcome. Can I add one thing before we go? So in terms of the drawings, when I said last time that it never finishes, I can go back and change things. So the sense of revision is important for me, but also in my work dealing with trauma, I feel sometimes when I'm making something, maybe I didn't do it with enough sensitivity or correctness. So I'm always interested in feedbacks from different people. And then for an iteration of the same work, I may make changes, or I make changes so that it becomes better somehow, more impactful or more meaningful or more correct or more respectful. So for me, it's really important to be given the space to make a mistake or make mistakes, and then get the proper or different kinds of feedbacks to say, okay, how do I go forward with this? So that's where I am right now, because I feel I need to go forward, but while I'm going forward, I may make a lot of mistakes, but like my drawings, in my installations, I have the room to make changes, to make it much more respectful. And I don't know if correct's the word, but I would say I want to do the right thing. And I mean, we all do, but yeah, so it's how to do it in the work. And also the next step is to how to do something outside the artwork that is also meaningful and engaging. So that's my next big challenge.
Super interesting. I love it. I love just how we're able to, you know, making mistakes is such an important way of being able to, you know, kind of operate within the world. And then especially as artists, to, you know, have opportunities to address, you know, work that we make, and not feel like, I think it's important for artists to hear, younger artists too, that works are never finished, and we don't have to, you know, kind of like feel that they have to be finite, and specifically such that, you know, we can always receive feedback, we can always learn, and that's how we make a dialogue, which is a practice in itself, and you know, definitely a part of your work.
So keeping all that in mind, I'm so happy to see Jenny Yu's work in the show, because her work also addresses her concerns regarding Indigenous rights and issues. So I need to talk to her more.
A lot of series of conversations.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Ed. Let's keep in touch, and I hope we can see each other.
That'll be amazing.
In real life.
Yes,
in the
for sure.
In future.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about everything or something.
Yeah. Pretty good.
Yes.
Take care.
Bye-bye.